And welcome, folks. Hawatlo, my name is David. I use he, him pronouns. I have the honor of serving as the coordinator of Dishkama Humboldt, the community land trust of the Wiyot tribe. The Wiyot tribe are one of the co-anchors of this conference, joined by Nicola Walters of Cal Poly, one of the 4 or 5 different departments co-anchoring this session, as well as Cooperation Humboldt, local community organization that I actually helped to co-found. Take a moment to actually acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Wiyot ancestral territory. Jarajiji means a good place to stop and rest. We now know it as Eureka. And this is Decolonizing Economics, the 3rd annual post-capitalism conference. I want to share that because this is, in fact, the 3rd conference that we've done. And the Wiyot tribe always participated. First year giving an opening, the next year the opening, and then doing another substantive panel. But this year also, because the relationship has deepened and grown, we went to the Wiyot tribe, the formal tribal government, the tribal council, and invited them to co-anchor it. Tribal Chair Ted Hernandez made the motion. It was unanimously adopted. I just want to let that sink in for a moment, that a governmental entity agreed to co-anchor something called the Post-Capitalism Conference. And through the course of planning for it, struggling and grappling, we literally renamed it Decolonizing Economics, the 3rd annual post-capitalism conference. And that's why I'm really very eager to turn this over to Lisa Hubbard for a session called Contesting for Power, because that, to me, friends, is where it's really at. And so with that, I'm going to turn this panel over to my new friend, Lisa.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for that warm contextual welcome there. Thanks to all of you for logging on and tuning in. As David indicated, I'm Lisa Hubbard, your host for our session this afternoon, Contesting for Power for a People's Economy. I use the pronouns she and they, and for those who would like a description, I'm a white-skinned, mid-50s person with glasses, light red hair, and wearing a blue shirt. Lots of new things. I am the new director of organizing at the New Economy Coalition, or NEC, one of the sponsors of this auspicious 3rd Decolonizing Economics Summit. NEC is a 200-member strong network building the solidarity economy in the US and showing that another world is not only possible, it's already happening. So I'm dropping our website link in the chat for those of you who are not already connected to our vast and growing network of individuals and principally organizations, but hope that we may, beyond today's convening, connect as we can build power for democratic, inclusive, just world where meeting people's needs over profits is the beating heart that unites us. And I'm dialing in today from Portland, Oregon, on the land stolen from the Chinook, Kalapuya, and other indigenous peoples who now make up the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde community. I invite you to learn more about the history of this community, our land's caretakers, at the link that I'm dropping in the chat when I can figure out how best to multitask. Quick bit about me as I introduce our session and speakers. I learned the value of solidarity growing up in a union household. I identify as a white, gender non-conforming lesbian organizer and have spent my life building multiracial working class coalitions, contesting for power in a wide variety of ways as part of the labor movement in communities across the US, from California to Florida. And in our session today, please expect an engaging conversation about a few bold and creative ways that communities building pathways to a people's economy, a solidarity economy, are contesting for power to do just that. Our 3 panelists, who will introduce themselves in more depth, but so that you can find them on the screen. Excited to introduce journalist, author, and organizer Ernesto Arce from the California Progressive Alliance, environmental justice organizer Vivian Satterfield from Verde Northwest in Portland, Oregon, and the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition, Props to Vivian also, who got a platform in the New York Times today, just this morning, demanding that the future of people and our planet should not include more concrete and freeways, among so many other principles. And last but not at all least, our final panelist is worker-owned co-op organizer and attorney Ray Crisatello from the Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West, local union based in California, and the worker-owned recovery coalition that she'll talk about. So again, we'll drop some of those links in the chat so you can learn more about folks assembled here. But each of our panelists plans to address a live strategy that they're leading to contest for power through organizing our people to engage in electoral politics in our so-called representative democracy and through a legislative campaign. Lots of slices about how best to contest for power. Excited that we'll have previews and in-depth exploration of just a few of them. And after we've heard from Ernesto, Vivian, and then Ray, we'll spend a little time on the provocative questions we have for one another as a moderator and panelists. And then we hope to have plenty of time to take audience questions from the chat. So fire them up and we'll keep track of what you're thinking as we proceed here. And one suggestion I have before we launch into our panelists, a suggestion I have for sort of our post-panel discussion is to think about building the independent political power that we need to forge a people's economy out of racial capitalism and the ills of white supremacy. Last week, I'm excited that our comrades at Mejente, a group of Latinx and Chicanx people who are part of movements for justice and self-determination for all, dropped a great video describing their embrace of the framework Sin, Contra, and Desde that they learned from Compas in Chile. There's a great 10-minute video that talks about their approach in political framework. And I think that that is useful to think about as you listen to our panelists and as you think about how you're working within, without, and against the state, the government, and those in power that maintain the status quo to build the power that we need that delivers us into another world. So without further ado, Ernesto, for a further introduction to who you are and how through the California Progressive Alliance, you're doing work to take us into that new world. Ernesto?
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that introduction, and thank you to the New Economy Coalition for having me and for having this very fascinating discussion that we're about to have on contesting for power and how we put politics and power back into the lives of ordinary working class Americans. Californians here, since I'm representing the California Progressive Alliance. A little bit about myself. I spent 17 years as a journalist with Pacifica Radio, KPFK in Southern California, and with our partners up in the Bay Area, Northern California, KPFA. I was the news director at KPFK in Los Angeles, as well as I served as a Southern California bureau chief for the entire Pacifica Evening News, which was an endeavor to kind of compete, if you will, or contest for power, if you will, with NPR's version of the California Report. So I think we did a pretty good job of bringing truth, bringing those accountable, those people in positions of power and authority and influence, making them accountable for their actions. And I think we did a great job. We regularly highlighted issues of unhoused people, the struggles of undocumented workers and undocumented students when it came to the DREAM Act, all sorts of labor issues, and ensuring that the labor movement was empowered, ensuring that the labor movement had a voice and was actually the protagonist of the news reports that we would air on a nightly basis, make sure that we weren't just hearing from the McDonald's Corporation or Burger King when it came to the Fight for 15, or from some of the disgruntled people whose lives were temporarily disrupted by a protest out in Westwood or right on Wilshire Boulevard. But more importantly, to hear from the workers to let people understand why it was that they were holding up traffic, in the middle of the week, why it was that it was important for them to earn a living wage when CEOs were making, or even actually just the franchise owners were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a week. So it was important for us to do this type of work. And I think my work at KPFK and as a public radio journalist really helps serve my new role as a member of the steering committee of the California Progressive Alliance, where we hope to continue holding people accountable for their actions, holding those people that are powerful accountable for their actions. And so CPA is a new organization that hopes to galvanize Californians up and down the coast, from San Diego all the way up to Humboldt, all the way up to our friends in Northern California, to understand that power comes from community, power comes from grassroots building, and we won't shy away from electoral politics either. We understand that we do need to run candidates to hold these powerful people accountable for their actions. And I think one of the founders of our organization is Gail McLaughlin, who actually ran for lieutenant governor in 2018. And although I think the mainstream network news might refer to her bid as unsuccessful, but in reality, it was actually very successful. What she was able to do in the post-Bernie Sanders movement was to galvanize all of that electricity, all of that momentum to actually building campaigns to hold. For example, she now sits on the Richmond City Council, and what she's been able to do rather amazingly is hold Chevron accountable. We've probably all heard the news stories about the Chevron refinery in Richmond, constantly explosions, catching fire, polluting the low-income working class neighborhood where it resides. And we have people like Gail McLaughlin, who served as mayor for many years there, holding a corporation like Chevron accountable for its actions and making sure that they pay their fair share to society. And Gail has been able to do an amazing amount of work, not just to hold Chevron accountable, but to hold all corporations across the golden state of California, as they say, accountable for their actions. And it's thanks to people like Gail that I'm in this position that I'm at right now, and I'm extremely grateful for all the networking that I've been able to do with the CPA, and so much. I've only been sitting in this position for just a couple of weeks, but I look forward to all the network with all of the comrades and the friends and the allies that we're getting ready to do for this year of 2022. I'm going to now pass it on to Vivian Satterfield, who's up in Portland, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about what she's doing.
Thanks so much, Ernesto. It's wonderful to hear your introduction and a little bit about your work. Greetings, everybody. I'm Vivian Satterfield. I use she, her pronouns, but prefer my name. I am joining you all here at the same place that Lisa is. Well, we're actually not in the same place, but we're in the same community here in Portland, Oregon, unceded Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya lands. I think there was a link dropped in the chat. I'd like to hear more about the really rich history of First Peoples who are still here, still organizing and agitating here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. It's wonderful to be able to join you. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Verde, a community-based organization located in the Cully neighborhood of Portland. So if you've ever flown into PDX, as our president is right now, they will have flown over and landed in the Cully neighborhood of Portland. And I'm here, and also because, it was plugged earlier, and y'all, I'm just so proud. I was featured alongside a lot of other climate and transportation advocates in today's New York Times. I do think it is a paywalled, digital only article. I actually was really hoping to find a way to find a print of this. My parents are located in Malaysia. I am going to be able to travel to see them for the first time in 4 years later this year, and I wanted to bring just like a whole stack. But if you do find it in print, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, I hope that that can be shared broadly to help show folks that the work that we're doing here is intersectional. Environmental justice, especially urban environmental justice, is just as much about holding bad actors accountable, polluters, like Owens Brockway, the glass recycling plant, with whom they worked with Earth Justice to file a complaint against. And it's also about, using all the tools that we have available, whether it be electoral route, utilizing legal challenges, and, just tried and true grassroots organizing and agitation, and utilizing the power of media and narrative and storytelling, through our capacity to nurture one another and feed our communities. Those are all radical acts. And I'm so proud to be a part of an organization who utilizes all of those tools and more in order to continue to contest for power. So I'm really here to share the successes of a 2018 ballot measure called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Luckily, our story has been well told. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat here online. Some of the things I'll be sharing with you can be found on the website. We have a comprehensive toolkit, everything from a one-pager to actually a quite thorough multi-page narrative that really shares how this incredible climate win in our community, and actually was the only climate ballot measure to pass anywhere in the United States in the 2018 elections, how that was possible. So I really encourage you after today, and hopefully our story here can inspire you to think about the sort of electoral strategies that you may use to achieve the overarching goals of climate resiliency, of moving the money in job training, and of trying to visualize a way to build the good. So, first of all, I have to say that the ballot measure passed overwhelmingly here in the city of Portland, with over 65% of voters approving yes to the Portland Clean Energy Fund. But anytime I have the opportunity to speak to a broader audience outside of Portland, Oregon, I have to do a little bit of myth busting about what it is like here in Portland, Oregon. I think the New York Times article also does a really good job of doing so. Folks have a perception, perhaps, of what it may, how people may look, how they may move around, and sort of this idea of an ecotopia that we have it all figured out here in progressive Portland, Oregon. Let me assure you that idea is probably wrong, because we actually have a lot of inequities built into our systems here from the very early founding days of the state of Oregon as a whites-only, racially exclusive state. In our founding, a lot of the racial exclusion languages wasn't even eliminated from our constitution until the late 70s, and we're still doing a lot of work to acknowledge and to reconcile, much less get to reparations around a lot of the harm that has been done in our communities. So doing progressive work here, and especially doing in electoral realm, is actually very difficult, and it may surprise you, some of the stories that come out of here, and more is more likely to be found in places that may be more overtly hostile and racist to our ideas. So just kind of want to do a little bit of myth busting, because Portlandia is not real, it is a television show. So some of the early genesis of the idea for the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which I'll describe the mechanism because I'm also a policy wonk. It enacts a business licensing fee on billion-dollar national corporations that have an annual gross revenue and at least $500,000 in Portland-based sales. That's very, very narrow definition, because they have to contribute at least 1% of that gross annual revenue to what's known as the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Something that folks may not know is that Oregon as a state does not have a sales tax. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. We do not have a sales tax. Therefore, the way that we can raise revenue in the state is extremely limited. I'm not going to go into all of the taxation pieces, but all that to say, it was a lot of work to try to find a way to generate a mechanism to raise revenue that wasn't going to be called a sales tax, and still was able to raise significant funds. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund, let me see how much time I have. Oh my goodness. I don't have much time to continue talking about some of the details, but essentially PCEF offers this community-led vision, which really frontline communities, organizers working grounded in community, working with organizers of color, working with even some of our labor partners, were able to think about how we could collaborate and advance this clean energy vision that we had, how to do the job training, how to do the energy efficiency projects. We knew that we had the capacity in our communities, and especially locating those in the long underserved, low-income neighborhoods that have really endured this long legacy of not just active disinvestment, but neglect. You know, communities that never recovered from the 2008 Great Recession. You know, groups like the one that I work with right now, Verde, my prior organization I worked with, Opal Environmental Justice, were really part of the steering committee. The work was front loaded to really intentionally pull together the kind of power and the kind of people power that would be necessary to pull off a scrappy grassroots campaign. This again was pre-pandemic, so we did have a very, very strong ground game, the ability to do actions that, you know, right outside Walmart, you know, people over profit, really dynamic things that I think that in today's age we, you know, are a bit challenged to do. But we were able to really shape the narrative. We were able to launch the campaign, and from here on out, we're really looking at not just the implementation, and it is up and running. The fund itself, because of the mechanism, is generating well over $60 to $80 million every single year, because of course these large corporations did not hurt like everyday working people during the pandemic. In fact, they have had record profits. Therefore, the Portland Clean Energy Fund is a beneficiary of those record profits. But it has come under heavy scrutiny. It is under attacks all the time, not just on the editorial boards of our local newspapers, but also through dark money campaigns that continue to question at a time in which our communities are really hurting and struggling with visible houselessness, mental health issues, addiction, you know, not having access to jobs. Of course, this is the time that big business says, hey, why don't we look at the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which is taking all of our money and do things like, quite frankly, downtown beautification projects. Why don't we use some of those funds to address rounding up houseless people and into, you know, open air encampments. Those are the fault, you know, those are the bad ideas that they have. And part of our challenges is still to name some of those false solutions in order to preserve and defend the Portland Clean Energy Fund, which really comes out of our community vision for the type of projects that that we think will continue to sustain us well into the future. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and pass it off to Ray so that they can share a bit about their dynamic work as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ray Crisatello. I use she, her pronouns, coming to you from Oakland on the stolen land of the Ohlone. And I'm really, really happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm the Deputy Director of Research at SEIU United Healthcare Workers West. We're a labor union statewide in California of over 100,000 allied healthcare workers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our sort of workforce development and union cooperative development work, which has kind of started off as something siloed a bit in organized labor, separate from the cooperative movement, I'd say, and delightfully to me has now developed into some pretty deep coalition work that's led us to do some legislative and policy work as a coalition. Yeah, so that's kind of the overview of what I'd like to touch on. And where this came from the local that I'm at, UHW. This is a number of years ago. Some people like me who do strategic research for the union were thinking about ways to help our union membership and also sort of more broadly, you know, working class and middle class people in California, although we focus on healthcare workers. But folks deal with the host of workforce and work-life sort of balance issues that are becoming more and more difficult. And sadly, the realities of a lot of those dynamics have gotten much worse during the pandemic. So these are things like, well, in healthcare, changing scopes of practice, but sort of more generally attempts to contract out work, to misclassify workers as independent contractors when really they should be employees with formal protections of employment, all the sort of side effects of casualized and gigification of different types of work. And so we were kind of setting out to look at large scale systemic ways to not just force proper classification of workers, but create a more asset rich and benefit rich environment for, again, for us, for healthcare workers, which is what our focus, to regain control over their work lives. So somewhat long story short, we ended up kind of arriving at becoming, activists in the area of worker ownership, being a really key and actually doable place where the union could help incubate these sorts of models and have really meaningful change in the lives of healthcare workers. So the policy work that I referenced initially, I guess I'll say sort of more broadly, our local does a lot of ballot initiative and legislative development. And so that kind of, in terms of socializing an investment in this kind of newer policy area, wasn't really much of a lift. But workforce development, taking a shift towards like actually supporting worker ownership, that was something new a few years ago. So so our local has become the member, so far the only, but hopefully soon will be not the only, organized labor member of a policy coalition called Worker-Owned Recovery California, or the Work Coalition. So this coalition was formed by state and national experts, worker-owned companies, and so far one, but hopefully more, labor unions, all of which have been working for years to advance worker ownership in different ways in communities most impacted by social and economic inequities. And where our organizational visions intersect is around the idea that employees becoming owners creates opportunities for wealth building and community stability. And now, even more so than maybe even 5 years ago, can help lift California and workers out of the pandemic and the sort of economic effects of the pandemic. So the coalition, we're working on a few forms of education for small business owners, increased awareness of technical assistance for co-op conversions, very current, as in like we were in a hearing a couple of days ago on this, legislative and budget plays, and other policy work. And we're considering like local initiatives that advance co-ops, and there's a lot of really wonderful examples to follow. In California, there's plenty of cities that have already passed resolutions in support of worker ownership. So we have some nice places to look, and other states too offer us some great examples. We're looking to other states in terms of how to incentivize and subsidize the model, which we really did a lot of before coming to SB 1407, which is the bill I'll describe quickly also. But yeah, so for example, like Iowa and Missouri reimburse 50% of the cost of an employee ownership feasibility study, which really helps jumpstart the consideration of somebody retiring, for example, selling to their workers if it's a viable business. Vermont, Colorado, there's other states that are ahead of us in terms of the state and subsidizing and investing in worker ownership in really ingrained ways in state government. So where we arrived as a coalition, SB 1407 is called the Expanding Employee Ownership Act. So our coalition developed this, and it'll establish a dedicated hub within the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, which we call GoBiz. And that office, which is really a person, like the legislation calls for a person to be placed there to administer this work, will help educate stakeholders about employee ownership, assist business owners and workers in navigating available resources, and provide funding for technical assistance, and also streamline and reduce barriers to existing business transition processes, which is for the members of our coalition who are actually worker owners in cooperatives. We have really amazing insight into what the day-to-day, like on the ground hurdles are, like, you know, regarding insurance or bank loans that don't recognize what a cooperative is, and those present pretty serious barriers to forming or converting a business that is not a regular shareholder-owned company by 3 people or something like that. So I'll just take a couple more minutes to describe, just because it's sort of interestingly, although this wasn't initially on purpose, at the same time, there's legislation moving on also on the sort of theme of scaling cooperatives. And this is a piece of legislation that that myself and some others at UHW began developing a few years ago in the context of the Dynamex California Supreme Court decision, and then what became AB 5, although that wasn't at the time on the books. And this is called the POWER Act, which stands for Promote Ownership by Workers for Economic Recovery, which we think is very clever. And it was initially called the Cooperative Economy Act. Anyway, now it's called the POWER Act. And so this is speaks a little bit more to kind of the platform companies that have been rampantly misclassifying workers. So what the legislation does is tries to level the playing field, especially for labor pools and staffing pools, by reducing barriers to the formation of worker co-ops. So it establishes a voluntary member-based mutual benefit corporation, which we call the Association of Cooperative Labor Contractors. And the association serves as a worker-directed resource for technical assistance and houses business operations. So it, among other things, would allow for economies of scale to benefit operations costs like payroll software, for example, that a small enterprise, like a small co-op, would have a hard time floating. And cooperative labor contractors can be, under the legislation, can be created in any industry, so healthcare, transportation, food delivery, anything. And to ensure that members of the association are truly high road employers, members have to meet high minimum labor standards on wages, pay transparency, retirement savings, healthcare, things like that. And there's democratic worker control standards too, to ensure this is actually a worker-driven entity, and that the profits generated by the labor in the staffing pool stay within the worker base. And on the sort of flip side, incentive side, to incentivize and offset the costs of the model, association members receive tax and incentives that are consistent with California's credit union laws. And the other entities that would, hopefully contract with association members for labor receive some joint employment relief. So there's kind of like a, two-direction incentive scheme there. So, okay, that's maybe I'll pause there, because I'm hoping that there's questions that all of us can collaborate on.
That's great. Thanks, Ray. We got some questions coming in, from chat that we'll absolutely get to. I guess in the interim, wondering if there are provocative questions that each of our panelists might have for one another, or to lift up as we anticipate engaging with the assembled crowd of more than 100 joining us this afternoon. So I'm opening the mics, so to speak, to Vivian. What you got?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Ray. I'm just curious about the folks who are involved in the worker-owned cooperative. The majority of them have experience being in an organized labor union prior to being a part of the worker-owned cooperative. Can you kind of speak to the experiences of folks who may have had that experience, or who may be coming into this having never had that sort of workplace environment before?
Yeah, it's been interpersonally, it's been really interesting. Mostly no. The Worker-Owned Recovery California Coalition members, aside from myself, nobody else has been a staff member of a union. I think a couple people have maybe been in unions as grad students or in some way or another, but fairly little fluency and definitely not much personal experience with unions, either, just in their own lives or as like policymakers. So that, and then on the flip side of that too, like that's deeply my world, but I'm much less fluent. I mean, hopefully increasingly so through what I've been doing, but much less fluent in the world of the solidarity economy and worker ownership. So it has been, yeah, I mean, there's sort of like a personal or interpersonal, like trust building and like movement building coalition thing that's happening. Like we hired a consultant to help us do organizational development amongst ourselves for this exact reason. And we're actually in May going to do like a 2-day retreat to try to, we sort of formed ourselves in 2020 and like just to see what we could get done, and then delightfully found that we are really aligned and can get stuff done together, except, maybe somewhat like a co-op starting up. We're sort of now saying, okay, we need more of a structure and to be really like thoughtful about how we make decisions and how we manage conflict and things like that. And so now we're sort of pausing to do that. Yeah, there's like been a fair amount of learning about the backgrounds we all come to the coalition work with, and we don't really have that much cross-pollination in terms of our experiences before coming to the coalition.
That's great. Thanks, Ray.
Yeah.
Ray, do you have provocative questions you can think about? Ernesto, you got any for our panel colleagues here?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I wanted to ask Vivian a little bit more about the the Portland the new economy and the Clean Air Act that she's been working on, and just fascinated about, she made a couple of references to Portlandia and how everyone thinks, well, it's this idyllic, almost perfect suburban oasis. When in reality, there's a lot of, I've heard people that have left Portland having sought that oasis, that greener pasture, and have come back to California pretty disappointed in Portland, saying, well, it's a very segregated city, class-wise and race-wise. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, the new economy measures that you were working on.
Yeah, so the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and for short we call it PCEF, really the genesis of that idea was to shift the nexus of power in setting environmental policy and in setting environmental outcomes and in moving the money and the resources for this. So it really was a bit more comprehensive in its movement building goals than just raising a whole bunch of money for green things. Obviously, that is a strong message that we went to the voters with. And we did do some segmented messaging. So I touched a little bit about the composition of the PCEF campaign and the steering committee, but I'll go a little bit more in depth. So there's a lot of intense relationship building and a lot of intentionality in ensuring that the steering committee driving the Portland Clean Energy Fund idea and doing the polling and really calling the shots on the campaign really were representative of communities of color. So we had the local NAACP chapter, again, my organization Verde, we're Black, Indigenous, and people of color led and staffed. We had the Coalition of Communities of Color, which represents 7+ culturally specific organizations. Let's see who else. Again, I mentioned my organization I used to work for, Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. So, Verde and Opal are the two environmental justice organizations here. And we had a number of traditional environmental groups as well. Like when I talk about traditional, I'm talking about like the Audubon was there, the Columbia River Keepers. I mean, these are the Sierra Club. These are predominantly white-led, dominant culture organizations. But, so together, that was how the steering committee was comprised. And then we had other community supporters. And so a lot of the tensions and a lot of the contestation between this is what environmental outcomes should be. Like that actually happened at the steering committee level. That way we didn't have to have those fights more publicly when the campaign was started. It also allowed us to have a really strong ground game in terms of segmenting our approach in door knocking and messaging to our communities. I mean, all of the materials were multilingual because we had engaged so many organizations. It was, you know, organizers of color going and door knocking in areas that, yeah, are segregated, you know, racially and socioeconomically in our city. But that's also what garnered us such large support. So you didn't have the typical electoral map for progressive policies and ideas in Portland, which is like all the wealthier white neighborhoods in the very concentration center of Portland saying yeah, and then everyone else being like nah. Instead, this had actually a wide breadth of support, including a lot of places where communities of color, especially the Black community, has been gentrified and displaced from the inner core. So, you know, it was a lot of like those tough conversations you have to have in rooms, you know, to work out some of those details, work out some of that power dynamics before we got to, okay, now let's go door knocking and let's, you know, have these conversations in the public realm.
One of my follow-up questions there, Vivian, is each of you named some pretty enormous extractors that you had to contend with. You know, Ernesto talking about, you know, some of the outgrowth of California Progressive Alliance work was, you know, in Richmond and, you know, against Chevron. Vivian, you know, you alluded to and started to sketch out a little bit how the Portland Business Alliance, you know, has convened, you know, and is now working against the initially successful implementation of PSEF. How does it feel to go up against such big bad actors?
I mean, it's what we have to do, right? As we cannot be afraid of folks who have a lot of money and who are used to controlling the dominant narrative and the seats of power. I will tell a very funny story here briefly, which was that during the campaign, one of our actions was that we wanted to deliver a letter to the Portland Business Alliance, who actually had raised a no campaign in response to our Yes Portland Clean Energy Fund campaign. They called it like no grocery tax or something weird, even though this would never even apply to groceries, medicines, or any other sort of you know, everyday need. And so, you know, we went to go deliver this letter, and me, someone who loves visual actions, created like a big ass envelope. It was like a theater prop, you know, as big as I am, you know, to deliver to their offices. And again, this is in 2018. They were so afraid of me and these actually, the letter that we wanted to deliver was being penned by members of the faith community, really saying the moral imperative of acting correctly for climate justice. And the letter was really to appeal. And so me and a number of faith leaders brought like this big, giant prop envelope to the offices physically of the Portland Business Alliance. Not only did they lock the doors and instruct all their staff to move away from the glass windows, they also called security to escort us out of the building. So the story, like the action wouldn't have been a news story if they hadn't have been so threatened that their reaction was to lock the doors, cower, and call armed security to escort us out. Then it became a news story because, of course, one of my smart co-organizers pulled out a cell phone and started recording. We took some video and photos. And, you know, I didn't even wear my black Doc Martens that day, so I thought it was real rude.
Appreciate the fearlessness in approaching the immensity of racial capitalism and all of its extractive components. And building that tight coalition over the course of years, not just to, you know, advance the Portland Clean Energy Fund, you know, as a ballot measure, but also to defend it and hang together in thinking of creative, expansive ideas to implement the millions of dollars that now are going to frontline communities to not turn Portland into the Portlandia of TV, but one that communities are visioning and wanting to make. A question for Ernesto that I have in thinking about, as you build the California Progressive Alliance, are you thinking about, what a particular test of your strategy might be, or is there an upcoming issue where you want to build your coalition around? What's some of your thinking about what the rest of 2022 might hold for the Alliance?
We're very excited about what 2022 has in store for us as we get back to some semblance of normalcy, which is, I think most working class people would prefer to say, hey, I think we like this idea of a 4-day work week, right? We like the idea of spending more time with our families and our loved ones. There's a great Jamaican dub poet from London who wrote, he penned a song called More Time. And it's just a simple message of, hey, working people want more time with their loved ones, more time with their husbands and wives, more time with their children. And so I think if you even want to call it a post-pandemic or a pre-variant time that we're living in, I think the California Progressive Alliance is excited about being able to reach a whole new group of people that have been galvanized over so many different issues. As we know, billionaires doubled, tripled their wealth at a time when most people were at the DPSS office, asking for programs like CalFresh and food assistance and cash assistance, at the unemployment where you've had the EDD, the California Employment Development Department, with just unprecedented numbers of unemployed people, barely scraping by to make ends meet for their families. We had a landlord association that actually came out against tenants who were saying, look, please, let's have a moratorium on evictions, if even just for this pandemic period, which we know even the LA County Health Administration has been using these very dubious claims that saying, okay, well, the average worker who has contracted COVID should stay home for 10 days. Oh, well, now it's 7. Oh, well, now actually, if they aren't exhibiting symptoms, they can go right back to work. So, you've got all these contradictions from the from the ruling class, from the capitalists, and from the owners of these businesses. But the great majority of Californians want to see a different California. They want a different society, and they know that it's within reach. As the great author Arundhati Roy said, on a good day we can hear her breathing. There's a new world that's on its way. And so I think our strategy as a CPA is to galvanize all of these people, to unify them behind a message of we as workers, have a huge stake in this society. This society is ours, and we're going to fight to make it a better society. So that is a multi-pronged approach, if you will, which is not just grassroots activism to make sure that that we fight the lifting of the eviction moratorium, which is what the landlords associations desperately want, to kick out poor working class people that have nowhere else to go. It's not just fighting for a more fair minimum wage, or I don't even like using the term minimum wage, but it's really a living wage that we're fighting for, right? Every Californian deserves, whether they're flipping burgers, whether they're doing janitorial, custodial work, everyone deserves a living wage in California's economy, regardless of what their issues are. And that's why I call it a multi-pronged approach. We want to be able to mobilize people on the grassroots level, get people, we had a YouTube forum where we talked about the reemergence of Labor Day, the reemergence of May Day, the reemergence of the labor movement that has been so hurt. And I'm sure Ray can talk about this as well. Fighting to make, the idea of a labor union more relevant to the political discussions and the discussions that everyday Californians are having. And so, we want to mobilize people on the grassroots level, but then we also want to be able to back candidates that have shown that they've been able to mobilize people and are fighting for just causes and have a good progressive platform that centers poor people, marginalized people, working people, undocumented communities that are still, I remember us using that term of 12 million people living in the shadows. We don't hear that term anymore. And when in reality, we still have millions upon millions of people that are essentially living in the shadows, not able to partake of California's world-class economy. And so I think that's part of the approach to getting people to join the CPA and getting people to say, hey, enough is enough. If Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all of these billionaires can quadruple their wealth at a time when we're at our worst situation, we think that they're ready to join with us.
Here, and I guess before we go to some of the questions that I've been, taking in from, folks out in Zoom land, want to revisit what I raised at the beginning of this session of, thinking about how we're building power within, without, and against the state. That global perspective, asking any or all of our panelists, what are your thoughts about maybe not the best in terms of ranking, but what are some of the ways in your experience that you see folks coming together in your communities to do any, all, or one of those strategies as we work to build an economy that serves people? Is it within, without, or against the state?
Go for it, Ray.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's hard. Somebody just wrote about a rising tide lifting all boats, and I feel like that in terms of the coalition work, that feels like actually kind of the key sentiment to me. But the vehicle, like to me, sort of depends on the problem particularly being looked at. So for the this might not be right, but that question to me strikes me like in the world of worker ownership and especially unionized worker cooperatives, there's so much what feels like impossible disentanglement between the corporations code and insurance code and all these things that actually dominate how you create any corporate form, even if it's one that rejects capitalism. There's sort of there's no way to work around or without it, and so it's felt the most possible to create a new structure by engaging directly with. I mean, the legislation, the budget play that we're making, and all of this is directly going at. We're going to work with, not within the limitations when we're trying to change what the limitations currently are, but it doesn't work around like state government, for example. It kind of goes at it head on and says like the way that this has been structured so far is so like deeply stacked against regular working people and is so problematic for all these different reasons. And actually it's a number of somewhat technical changes that can make it more accessible. And let's make those technical changes as step one, of many steps. But so that's kind of been, and I don't actually know for sure if the other members of the work coalition would all agree with that, because we do have maybe some varying theories of change among us. But at least as far as a tactic where we feel like the time and investment of, we're all like volunteering on that committee in that coalition, except we have one hired staff person who's a coordinator now, very recent, within the last couple months. But other than the rest of us, with the time that we have to put towards that, what can we get done? And that has felt like, wow, we really can get something done here. So that possibly by the realities of time has been kind of how we've gone at it and how I've thought about it so far.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah, I think I would, echo much of what Ray has said. For myself, I've chosen to work in a field in which I utilize inside-outside strategies and working to move the campaigns and to build the coalitions and networks. I don't always do coalition building necessarily, and not every issue needs a coalition, but to expand the realm of what's possible And so, you know, I do a lot of legislative work, not as much electoral work. We have a very challenging set of sideboards to doing electoral work here in the state, given that there's no limit on campaign contributions. That's why Nike came and, you know, fundraised over $1 million to kill a local transit ballot measure, right? So it can be really challenging, but I think that knowing that I'm doing some of the inside outside work allows for other agitation to become more possible and visible in that realm. Interested to hear what Ernesto has to say as well.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with both Vivian and Ray. Yeah, it's you know, with the CPA right now, we are, you know, we're reaching out to different organizations. We're reaching out to people that are, you know, electoral hopefuls with a message that, you know, if you agree with our very basic slate, you know, we're here to work for you. We're here to mobilize people for your campaign. We're here to get campaign contributions if we can. We're here to you know, help in any way that we can to get good people elected. And yeah, I mean, I think it's it's an interesting conversation to have in regards to you know, where solutions lie. And actually, you know, before I say anything else, I did want to say that I love how everyone introduced themselves as, you know, I'm here in land that was stolen from the Tongva. And so yeah, I just wanted to add that little part, because I think it's important for us to introduce ourselves as, you know, we're here on Turtle Island, and we're all representing, or we're all living on land that's been stolen from the original inhabitants. Yeah, that was what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Ernesto. And certainly drawing and hearing from all of you collectively that these are long-term projects. These are not short-term solutions. I was mentally trying to track, you know, Vivian, as you shared about the Portland Clean Energy Fund, took years of building in community before deciding to, you know, use a ballot initiative to address what folks felt could be, you know, addressed by that. Years and years of building. Now it's been years of going into implementation and you know, fighting back the forces that you need to contend with. Again, long-term prospects. But I want to move and you know, welcome participants. Thank you for the questions that you've posed in chat. I'm going to try to draw from some of those to continue this conversation more widely. Lifting up a question from Marianne, you know, perhaps best directed to you, Ray, about is there a map or of other unions who are looking beyond SEIU UHW at supporting worker ownership and worker co-ops? Where are those labor innovators?
Sure. Well, I think there is actually a literal map being developed by the Union Co-ops Council of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops, which is a great resource for a lot of things related to union co-op development. But just as a more present answer, there are a number of unions that are doing similar work, and yeah, I'd love to highlight a few examples just because I feel like it helps. Well, it helps those of us who are trying to create them look to innovations that have already kind of been around, and also maybe that's not even the right word, because truly none of these ideas are new. Like, and so that's also sort of comforting. Yeah, so just to lift up a few. Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx, which I think maybe it was you somewhere earlier in the chat. I saw somebody say that they were SEIU in New York, so maybe this resonates in particular. Is actually the large? It's unionized by 1199 SEIU, and it's the largest co-op in the United States. It's, I think, around 2,500 home care workers. So they provide home health services in New York. They were founded in 1986. There's in terms of totally other industries, there's the Cincinnati Union Co-op Initiative, which they partner with the steelworkers, and they've looked at the Mondragon model in Spain to incubate sort of like a federated structure of co-ops in all sorts of industries, including grocery, manufacturing, and a bunch of others too. There's been some transportation unionized co-op work. So like CWA developed the Green Taxi Cooperative in Denver. I'd say there's sort of an overrepresentation of this kind of union co-op development work in the care sectors. So like home care, child care, healthcare. And so also I think I saw in the chat, so to directly answer the question about what UHW has developed, we developed a worker-owned cooperative that was spearheaded by a bunch of licensed vocational nurses in our union. It's called Nurses Can, and they do like home health visits for patients who are being seen through a federally qualified health clinic. And then much more recently, Allied Up, which is a multi-classification allied healthcare staffing cooperative. So these are healthcare workers who do particularly currently relevant jobs like respiratory techs, pharmacy techs, jobs that hospitals cannot fill fast enough during the pandemic. So these folks collected themselves into a worker-owned staffing agency. There's also LVNs, there's also medical assistants, and a bunch of classifications of workers. And they're, instead of, having per diem jobs that are under benefited at a bunch of different places, they're working for the co-op Allied Up and amassing the hours that they work at wherever they are getting placed for benefits. And they're unionized now. They initially were not when they created, but now they're unionized with UHW. So there's the two through UHW in particular, just a couple other in the care sector. Care Share in Cincinnati is a multi-stakeholder co-op in childcare. SEIU 775 in Washington State helped create the Washington Home Care Workers Purpose Trust, which is kind of like a co-op. It's a perpetual purpose trust. So it's similar in that it's defining documents embed the kind of like perpetual ongoing commitment to having a worker-centered entity. It's just it's a trust instead of a co-op. But that's incredibly clever and really powerful. Now big. I think there's 30,000 home care workers in that trust. That's sort of I think common one that gets pointed to, partly just because it's sort of fun to talk about, is Lobster 207 in Maine, which is supported by the lobstermen and the IAM. And then New Era Windows in Chicago, which is organized by UE 1110. They converted like what was an existing window manufacturing company into a worker-owned co-op. So anyway, there's just like a handful of examples, and there's plenty of other ones, but there are a number of, including the big unions, Teamsters, UFCW, SEIU, and then locals within those that are all looking at different kind of like worker-owned entities at a more, sort of a higher level. I think there's a reality or frustration with the kind of declining membership in organized labor, which in some part has to do with an inflexible, like the economy, the way that people are employed is all changing, but the general labor relations and kind of adversarial setup of union labor relations is doesn't totally speak to the reality of the current economics. And so I think that there is like this moment now where a lot of locals are somewhat out of self-preservation, and largely because of having leadership that's responsive to what's actually happening in their membership, are looking at ways that are sort of like a little more agnostic about formal unionization and are more just looking at like, well, how can we support and like fight these structures that are badly eroding the lives of working people. And this worker ownership is just one of those ways.
Great, thanks, Ray. Stepping a little bit more broadly now, Nicola asks, what does the overall landscape of coalition building work look like from California up into Oregon? Anyone have a take on that or perspective of what that looks like?
I can share a little bit about my kind of perception. I mean, obviously the Portland Clean Energy Fund was successful because of the coalition building and relationship building that was done on the front end. I mentioned, faith leaders, for example, community-based groups, racial justice groups, environmental groups. And there was some representation from, one of the largest sort of organized union that also plays in the political realm, which is the Columbia Pacific Building Trades. Here, was supportive as well. But and having had worked on also in relationship with Lisa on a number of other initiatives and coalition building, I still think that there's a lot of work to be done with the organized labor movement to truly have cross-sector solidarity and movement building that can be done. I think there's a lot of latent possibility in there, a lot of latent power. And I still see, I was pleased to be on this panel and to really think about, but I'm intimidated by this idea of like decolonizing economics, because like none of the examples that we're really offering is like a decolonial way of approaching this work. It's just sort of like shifting the power a little bit more towards that desired future state. And so I'd be remiss if I just didn't acknowledge the role of resources and money in coalition building. I mean, PSF was scrappy, y'all. Like, we had some philanthropic support, but generally in Oregon, the pool is quite shallow for monetary resources to do this work. And so what I have seen to be exciting is more and more organizers talking to one another, community-based groups, tribal peoples, really seeking to do exactly what this conference is prompting us to think about as a decolonial approach, and to raise the resources that we need outside of these traditional systems, because it's so deeply rigged against us. And even for the good, right? Even for the good campaigns that we're running. Again, I mentioned that there's just abysmal campaign finance laws here in Oregon still, which just makes it very, very hard to do this work. Even the organizations that I've chosen to work for, were 501c3 nonprofits. That really limits our ability to do certain types of work. And those are the rules of the game. So who changes those rules? They're elected officials, right? So it's kind of, and of course it's us as the people and our initiatives to, much like PSF and other sort of citizen initiatives, to change those systems. But so I think that some of the things I'm inspired by really come outside of that. The Oregon Just Transition Alliance is one of those spaces that we're trying to dream about that. These larger national alliances like the Climate Justice Alliance, Grassroots Global Justice. I mean, I really draw a lot of inspiration from the stories I hear in other communities. And I didn't even really share a lot about sort of the partnership and pollination that we have in the state of California, but we do check in with partners quite frequently, actually, in this, our neighbors to the north in Washington, and then to our neighbors right below our state border, because we share so many of the same conditions, right? Devastating wildfires during the summer, extreme drought all over, bad actor facilities, polluting our air and really threatening the livability of all of our communities. So yeah, I invite other thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, quickly, while you're on screen there, Vivian, question coming in about if you can answer this. Has Portland looked to Washington's Salmon Tourism Coalition for renewable energy transportation as a model, as you think about up and down the West Coast?
No, I'm actually quite unfamiliar with that, so thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah. Lots of good follow-up and cross connections happening. Ray or Ernesto, any thoughts you'd like to share about sort of coalition building across the West Coast here? Ideas had best spark further?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit about CPA, California Progressive Alliance's work in trying to eliminate student debt, which I was the host of that panel, and embarrassingly, I'm forgetting some of the, the facts and figures that we mentioned during that conversation. But it was, as you can imagine, astronomical figures, like something like 60 million Americans dealing with, I can't even remember, but billions and billions of dollars in student debt. And to kind of go off of what Vivian was saying about, yeah, you need money. There needs to be resources available to all of these movements in order for us to re-envision society in a much more equitable way. And one of the reasons why CPA, I think, backed the elimination of student debt was because it would essentially free up a lot of people, a lot of working people, a lot of young professionals, allowing them to not be riddled with debt, and to be able to spend more time to do other things, and to join coalitions like ours, and to join being able to put their money into campaigns such as ours, such as the People's Bank Bank LA initiative, getting campaign finance reform, getting big money out of electoral politics. And it's in terms of the question, and I apologize because I was momentarily distracted during that last question, so I wasn't even sure of the question while I was answering, which is probably not a good approach to answering things. But usually my cell phone is not very active, but it's on overload right now, so I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. But in terms of the question of how we coalition build and what's the future of coalition building, we feel that it is the goal of coalition building is really to go into our communities and see what it is people are dealing with, see what it is they want, see what it is, what the big problems are. If it's eviction moratorium right now after the pandemic, then it's eviction moratorium that we're going to be working with. Tenants organizations like the Los Angeles Tenants Rights Union, like the Unión de Vecinos, the tenants unions. All these different organizations that are saying, look, our people don't have a roof over their heads. As a journalist, I would take part in LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, Greater Los Angeles County Homeless Count. And every year, we were astounded by the number of unhoused people living on the streets of Los Angeles, and not just in areas that people know about, like the Skid Row area, but everywhere across Southern California, from Buena Park, Anaheim, right outside the Disneyland Resort, to areas like Pomona, Pacoima, Santa Monica, Venice. I mean, the number of unhoused people is just absolutely, it's so troubling and so disturbing. But it's a reality for our residents, people that are living in their cars, people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And so I think by fighting for a living wage, fighting for eviction moratoriums, and like I said, all of these different movements that we've backed up, like the elimination of student debt and the campaign finance reform and a People's Bank, are all measures aimed at empowering individuals so that they have more of an option of becoming part of our movements for social justice change.
Thanks, Ernesto. Let's see, Mark, I know that you're trying to ask a question. Is there a way that you can post it in chat so that we can keep the rhythm going here? And I see a question from Ernesto. Or I'm sorry, I have a question. Yes, for Ernesto from Justin. Have you interviewed worker retraining initiatives? Sounds like Just Transition. We'll talk with cities about how it is that where people live is not the same service district as where their employers are.
Yeah, that question was for me. Have you
Yeah.
Training initiative? Yeah, so we one of the last reports that I did in regards to the city of Los Angeles had they'd gotten some federal money, which I think they called it 10 for 10, I think it was called. And at the time, it was Hilda Solis was the labor secretary, and she also happens to be a resident of LA County. She's now a Los Angeles County Board of Supervisor, and her idea was to implement transportation funds and essentially get people jobs, get people living wage jobs. At the time, the biggest benefactor of this was the solar panel industry. So you had, I think, tens of thousands of people that were trained in solar panel industries and solar panel installment. Other people on the front end of that solar panel industry, which I assume to be sales and differing, different types of opportunities like that. And the problem that I understood was that the rebates that were given to homeowners, of course, they had to be homeowners, right? I mean, if you're renting, you're not going to invest any large sum of money on solar panels and solar panel technology. And so I think the biggest obstacle to this program being more successful was that it fell on the backs of, or rather, it was targeted or focused on homeowners. And once those rebate checks kind of dried up, people were no longer as interested in investing in solar panels. And I guess the cycle of that was that the work for a lot of these retrained quote unquote people kind of dried up as well. So that's kind of that's been my experience with a lot of like federal funds, state funds, Los Angeles County funds being earmarked for something that's a very progressive and great idea, great approach to giving people living wage jobs that essentially kind of dries up.
I actually would love to just sort of add on. And that limitation of federal and state funds is exactly where PSEF comes in at a municipal level. Now, of course, the limitations is that it only applies to the city in terms of Portland's geography. Obviously, Portland metro area is much larger than that. And then, of course, this is needed in all communities across the state of Oregon and across in tribal communities as well. But PSEF does, because we have this this fund, and it's actually a grant fund, that's where it can like fill the gap with that. And so an example of that is, we experienced Oregon's second largest, deadliest natural event last year, which was the heat dome. I know that all the Pacific Northwest was really impacted and blanketed in just historic oppressive heat, which resulted in deaths because our homes and apartments and dwelling units here are typically have not accommodated both heating and cooling. The summers have just not been that hot. It's pretty temperate, but clearly the effects of climate change are coming rapidly and drastically. So, through the Portland Clean Energy Fund are able to, address putting in heat pumps. We actually went to the state and did some emergency legislation, Verde and a number of other groups, in order to get the state to create an emergency fund and quickly act to do that deployment so that we can get just air conditioners and also heat pumps in people's homes and rental units immediately. But sort of, on the PSEF side, that's where that long-term job training really comes into. And through Verde's own social enterprise in-house called Verde Builds, we were able to do home assessments to low-income homeowners within the Cully neighborhood and work with mobile home parks as well, which have a really different model of ownership, not always addressing, the rental component, but, we're trying to find ways to fill the gap where the need is in our communities.
Thanks for lifting that up, Vivian. And just want to highlight some of the chat that's happening, important perspectives. I hear you, Ted Franklin, about union co-ops, awesome, and yet at the same time, we still need to contest for power inside, huge extractive corporations like Amazon and Walmart. Was excited as a longtime labor organizer to see today that workers at an Apple retail store in Atlanta, Georgia, organized the South, formed a union. So the work that we see of folks inside Starbucks, Amazon, Apple, other enormous employers, the work that workers inside Walmart have been doing for years and years, to build organization and infrastructure to speak to their needs inside that huge employer, critically important. And so is the work, I would say, that, Ray lifted up, that not many unions have yet adopted in the same way that SEIU UHW has in California to advance and support financially, politically, and otherwise to ensure that workers can fire their bosses, own their future by building their own businesses in a model that serves our communities and needs more directly, whether it's healthcare or climate justice, solar installation, you name it. And Ernesto, drawing from experience across California to imagine new ways of electing candidates that represent what our communities need, and doing the hotshot organizing to make sure that those are the voices that are expressed. Thanks so much all for all the links that have been shared in chat. We are sort of coming to a close, and as we wrap up, wanted to certainly thank all of our panelists and for the rapt attention that so many of our participants have logged on to hear and share about. And since April was designated somewhere as National Poetry Month, would love to use this as an opportunity to end with at least a portion of a poem that always inspires me in thinking about what we must do to build deeply for our community's needs. So I'll share a bit from Imagine the Angels of Bread by Martin Espada, which is: this is the year that squatters evict landlords, gazing like admirals from the rail of the roof deck, or levitating hands in praise of steam in the shower. This is the year that shawled refugees deport judges who stare at the floor and their swollen feet as files are stamped with their destination. This is the year that police revolvers, stove hot, blister the fingers of raging cops and nightsticks splinter in their palms. This is the year that dark-skinned men lynched a century ago returned to sip coffee quietly with the apologizing descendants of their executioners. I'll put that in chat so that if you're inspired, you can read more and draw from that as you continue to imagine what it is like to build deeply in our communities, within, without, or against the state and the extractors who would force us down, and to dream up new ways of decolonizing economics to return the land and our peoples to a state that is of joy and enjoyment and sharing in one another's company in the shade of trees. I would also, am excited by the, very disparate and different, perspectives and participants here. I think of our networks like mushrooms. As some of you likely know, that mushrooms are fruiting bodies of vast underground fungal networks that connect roots of trees and shrubs. This mycelium web cultivates cooperative relationships among plants by sharing nutrients and information. And I hope that your leadership in your own communities fosters cooperative relationships with others to share information and resources as we have together today. There is no one idea, no singular strategy that will allow us to scale to build a solidarity economy, but I hope that folks' interests have been piqued and that we find ways to continue to connect with one another and build this network across so-called state lines or territories to build in our regions. Yay, mycelium. And David, as I see you here, want to, ask if you would close in any way for us, as you send folks off to, other sessions as, the additional days of this summit continue.
Well, thank you so much for that, Lisa. This was such an inspiring conversation. And like all of you, but especially Vivian, I want to really be grateful to you for lifting up also the challenge, right? This is called decolonizing economics. And, I think that we are as a movement in the early stages of really grappling with what that means, and the courage for you to bring that as a panelist into it. I just really want to honor that. I also want to thank the New Economy Coalition for coming in as a sponsor and really throwing down on this panel. You know, as Nicola may have mentioned at the very beginning, we had 400, almost 500 last year. We're over 900 this year. This movement is growing, and like a mycelium, we are beginning to connect with one another. So I just want to conclude by thanking Lisa Hubbard for putting this panel together. I want to thank all of our panelists, but mostly I want to thank you. And by you, I mean whoever is occupying the seat that your butt is in right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And as organized labor teaches us, each one teach one. Our next panel will be Dishkama Humboldt, the community land trust that I work for, as a case study on how decolonizing can work through regenerative economic development. Would love to have you there. And then our closing panel substantively will be on public banking and our good friends at the East Bay Public Banking Institute. And then we'll close out with some music, because every evening we close with some cultural offering. So again, thank you all. Drink water, get some rest. I see several of you have been with us all day. Don't forget to rest. Take care of yourself. Good job, Vivian. I see you in the screen doing that good self-care work. Thank you all, and we'll see you in 30 minutes at the next session. Remember, it's a different link. So go back to the email that Nicholas sent out. Bye, y'all. Peace.
Thank you all. Vivian, Ray, Ernesto, gratitude. Go forth and decolonize.
Pleasure. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.